G'day Internet, welcome back to another video. So over the years you've probably already gotten the impression that I was a Sega kid and will always be a Sega fan. I grew up on the Master System and the Mega Drive, and one of my favourite handhelds is the Game Gear. This is one I've had for a while, primarily because when Ben started talking about doing the link screens, he mentioned even way back then that he was also going to do a version for the Game Gear. So I hurriedly went out and bought a new one, and this has been sitting on the shelf ever since. It's been recapped, but that's as far as I've ever gotten with it. But then just recently, he's finally gotten around to starting work on the Game Gear screen that's going to go in this. And just yesterday, he dropped round to me a very early prototype of what's currently up on pre-order. So I've got that now in my hot little hands, and we're going to put it into this Game Gear. So here is my Game Gear. It's looking a bit rough. I do have a replacement lens on the way, so don't worry about this all being scratched up. The first thing we need to do is basically pull it apart. Now I've already removed all the screws, but we can pop the batteries out. And I've removed, like I said, I've removed all the screws. This should open out. And we just need to unplug the two boards, so here and here. And we can put this to one side for now, and we're left with this. Right, next we need to remove a whole raft of screws. And the board should just lift straight out. And it does. And we can put this to one side as well. Next, we want to remove the 4 screws that hold the original LCD in. And there's our old LCD. Right, next, mainly for sanity's sake, I want to remove the old LCD before we start working on everything else. Now, on this side, there is a bit of adhesive tape, and then the actual solder joints are on the other side. So we're going to start by removing this LCD. All right, and that's the adhesive out of the way, and we flip it over. And what I'm going to do is, well, I'm going to find my pair of tweezers. And what I'm going to do is slowly work my way along this with a soldering iron. And it should start to lift as I heat it up. Now you don't want to put too much lifting pressure on it, because the last thing you want to do is lift traces. Right, with that done, I just want to clean it up with some wick. All right, that is the screen. Adios. Right, so the next thing we want to do is remove the old backlight. Now, this is just held in by a couple of wires which are exposed, and we can just snip them, and that whole thing should come out, and it does. Nice. So the next component to remove is this guy right here, which I believe is an inductor or a coil or something. Mine is actually lifted up a little, so I could actually get some snips in there. Alternatively, you want to desolder it from, where is it? I think it's these 2 points. It's these 2 points just here, but I'm going to simply snip it out. Right, gone. So the next thing we want to remove are these two fuses which run either side of where the screen used to be. Now this isn't completely necessary, but it does make fitment of the screen and the frame a little easier later on. So if I grab my desoldering gun, a pair of tweezers and probably some help with a soldering iron, and they're out. So the next bit kind of falls into the handy tip scenario. So if we just come in and have a closer look at where we removed the ribbon cable for the screen, you have all these pins here which we need to solder to a bunch of them. So, and this is something I learnt doing the Lynx 1 screen because I spent most of the time just simply counting. Now, before I lay this down, the weird thing about this is that pin 1 is actually, it's not at the end, it's like here. So just remember that, because we'll be counting from that pin 1. But if I lay this down, I should be able to still keep a glimpse of that. Right, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to mark on this bit of masking tape what pins we actually need to solder to. And they are pin 8 and 9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pin 8 and pin 9. Probably should have got a better pen. And 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It's 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Right. Don't use a old felt tip like I did, use something better, but at least now I don't have to recount them every 3 minutes. So the next thing we want to do, and we could have done this before the bit of masking tape, but is to actually mount the screen to the board. Now if I move that out of the way and bring the frame in, you'll notice that the screen has a thicker border here, and that needs to actually go to the top, this being the top here. So if we flip that over and drop that in, you will notice there is a bit of wiggle room, and that's deliberate. Okay, so with that there, we should be able to take our board and lay it on top and line up the holes. And as soon as I can put my hands on my screwdriver, we can screw it in using the original screws. Right, and that's our screen mounted in the frame. So next we want to start laying wires onto this side of the board. Now I've got a bunch of just wires already pre-tinned. These are about, what would you call that, 20, 30 centimeters long, which is way more longer than you actually need. But at the end of the day, you can always trim a wire. It's a bit more difficult to add length. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start on these annoying ones here, and I'm going to start soldering these to the board. Right, with that done, this is probably a good opportunity to check it under a magnifying glass and maybe run across it with a multimeter to make sure you've got no shorts and make sure that you've got wires connected to the correct pins. So the next two wires that need to go down go to a couple of pads just here, and they are M10 and M11, and I suggest that you kind of angle them kind of at 45 degrees back down this way. And the other thing to be really careful, especially around here, you'll see there's lots of SMD resistors and stuff like that, and it's really easy to get a bit too close to them with the soldering iron and literally knock them loose. To be honest, I've had one fly across a room and not even realize it until it's too late. Right, so that's those two in. Now the next wires actually need to go, oh hang on, we can remove this bit of masking tape now. Now the next few wires actually need to go onto some points to the back of the cartridge slot. Now the reason I said to mount the screen first is some of these solder joints here can be quite fragile, and mounting the screen, you're doing a lot of flipping and moving and stuff like that, so I didn't want to risk these solder joints coming loose. The downside is it makes it a little difficult to get to some of these pins underneath the frame here, but not impossible. So if you want to do this soldering first and then put the frame on with the screen, no problem either. But for the top row, we need to get to pin 2, I believe. Yes, pin 2. Pin 14. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then the slightly easier one, which is pin 6 on this bottom row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, and one last one, for this side at least, needs to go to a solder pad up here named M16. And one last little tip, just to basically keep this out of the way of screw holes and stuff like that, I would suggest a little bit of Kapton tape on that wire, just to kind of keep it out of the way. On the other side of the board, we want to put a little jumper wire between a solder point called T10 and T11, which is just here. Now, the first wire we want to solder to the actual screen doesn't come from the bunch of wires from the other side of the board. What we want is we want clock, and it needs to come down to a pad just near the crystal here called FB1. So we're getting this done now while everything else is out of the way. Right, we're finally ready to start wiring up everything from the other side of the board. Now, the reason I've done this way is because we want to be able to route the wiring in a specific way, and that's basically to come around the other side of the crystal. It's mainly just to keep the wires out of the way of screw holes next to the cartridge and things like that. So we will now start doing this, and it's a case of laying it down, getting a length, cutting it, trimming it, soldering it, tinning it, and then soldering it to the board. Now I'm going to put all the pinouts in the description below instead of me going through stop, start the whole way through wiring this. But as a tip, start with the ones that are connected to the old LCD tiny pins first, and when you do it, leave some length. So see how that's got a bit of length at the end there? Leave some length on it. You don't want to pull hard on that joint round the bottom of the PCB. So I'm going to get started on that. Right, and that's us all wired in. At this point, if I was you, I would go back through and triple check all your wiring to make sure all the points from the underside are going to the correct pads on top. Ask me how I know. All right, the next thing I suggest you do is some testing. All right, so I'm going to grab a cartridge and I'm going to put it in. I'm going to bring in the base that's got the power board in it, either throw some batteries in it or use DC power like I am. Plug the two in, give it some power and turn it on. And it's working. Sweet. All right, now we're going to start putting it all together, but there's a little bit of fiddling around that you have to do when we do that, so I will show you. Okay. Take your top cover, don't need the game anymore, drop this in. Now the brightness wheel needs to poke out the side, so feed that in first and drop this in and give it a bit of a wiggle to get it to drop. Right, we're in. I then suggest at least at this point putting just a couple of screws into the main board to hold it in place and to line it all up. Right, the next thing we want to do is actually back the screws off on the frame a little. This will make sense in a minute. Bring in your top cover, back cover. Plug it in, plug your speaker in, plug this cable here, which I've managed to get caught underneath the board. Right. Close it up. There's no need to put screws into it just yet. Drop a game in, give it power, and turn it on. Now, I can see already that this screen is sitting too far to the left. It's also got a bit of a wonk to it because I can see a bit of a gap here and no gap there. And if I let that go again, I can also see it's sitting a bit high because the top's cut off. So we turn it off, power cartridge, so it needs to come down and to that way. So bring it down, make sure it's all nice and straight, and it needs to go, was it that way? That way, right. We can now, I'd probably just suggest locking in a couple of screws, which will be enough tension, at least initially. All right, and that's actually pretty good. It might take a few back and forth goes, but you'll eventually get it. So that all out. Lock down the screen into position and put the rest of your motherboard screws in. Give it one more test. Good, nothing's moved. And we can put all the case screws in. And there we have our working Game Gear. Oh, I managed to get some dust under the screen. All right, I have to go back in and get that dust out, but it's all working. So we should take a better look at the actual screen. Now, this is an IPS panel versus a TFT panel that you get in most other kits. What that means is it's a lot higher pixel density and a lot better contrast and a lot better color. So that's a pretty good step up. What you're looking at here is what's called Mode 1, which is scaled to fit the original screen size. Now, like all of them, as far as I'm aware, what that creates is quite a bit of shimmer, both vertically and horizontally. You can see it a little bit here in Shinobi 2. But one thing it does have is if I hold, I think it's up and start, we get scan lines. Come on, splash screen, go away. Right, so we've got scan lines, and if I hold down and start, we can turn that off, turn it back on again, off, right? If we hold start, it'll jump wide, right? That is now actually exactly two times scaled wide, which gets rid of all, I think it's the horizontal shimmering. And if we hold it down again, it'll go tall, which is actually 2 times scaled height-wise, which gets rid of all the vertical shimmer. Now, obviously that's way bigger than what we can see. This is really designed for a modded case, but it does get rid of pretty much all the shimmer. If I can get to a bit where it will show some of the shimmer. So yeah, but what you can do is if I hold down and start, I can actually scroll up and down. So depending on the game you're playing, you can get a decent field of view. Obviously we have brightness control. And the other thing that this screen does really well is Master System mode. So if we turn it off and I stick in my Master System converter and turn it back on again, and what we get is a beautiful crystal clear one-to-one Master System mode. So it's pixel perfect and it looks really nice on this screen. Where are we? Scanlines works here too. So this being a Master System kid and a big fan of the Master System, this is really nice. So there is my modded Game Gear and it looks very nice. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a prototype version. There are some changes coming. One of the primary ones being is that the production one is going to have a set of jumpers on the back of it so you can set your default scaling mode. You probably noticed when you first turn it on in this, it goes straight to the scaled mode for the standard case size to match the standard screen. But for instance, if you decide to mod your case to make more use of that 3.5-inch LCD, you can set the default startup screen mode to either modes 2 or 3, which is going to be very handy. Now, speaking of the case mod, I may do a follow-up video on that. The really short version is about 3 millimeters the whole way around you need to trim. If you want to go ahead and try that yourself, go nuts. I'm the world's worst case modder, but I may give it a go. But I won't do that until I've got my hands on one of the production PCBs for the screen. And so if that happens, I'll do a follow-up video. But for now, that will pretty much do it. If you like the video, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. You can now find the channel on Patreon if you wish to help me out like these wonderful people just here. And until next time, that'll do it.